Hello, pal fans. Garrett here, and welcome to our second episode of Blow for Blow, where we cover the non-stop journey of drama, hope, and information. For those watching that are aware, SuperCon was an absolute blast. I managed to get a legendary card of Blowin' Joe, the significant hero from Stockton in the 1920s, so you can imagine I'm pretty happy. I also managed to talk to Barry Hoonover from the animated slice of life show Flightless in Suburbia. He's a super nice guy, and I did manage to get a signature from him. Anyway, if you're interested in hearing more about that, I can cover it another time, because for now, we have a breaking incident. Earlier this week, a riot took place at the DC prison complex in the UK. While most are focusing on the UK's national hero team, Queen's Gambit, and their efforts to recapture all the inmates, I wanted to focus on what the minority is talking about, and that's who they believe started the riot and who they think is the most dangerous out of the ones that escaped. I am, of course, talking about the potentially powered criminal, Rust. While nothing has explicitly come out about the riot, I don't think it's really a stretch to think he had a hand in it. He was already involved in one almost 8 years ago within Albion, and the circumstances around that riot from years prior is filled with confusion. Now sure, whether or not he was explicitly the mastermind has to be determined. However, I definitely think he had some kind of hand in guiding it. Anyway, Rust is one of those villains that was actually fairly well known before turning to crime. He started out as a poet who made a modest name for himself on Instagram and attended poetry nights at the coffee shop Chips and Beans within the city. These were typically provocative statements towards the British government, and this gathered him enough attention to develop himself a crowd that would be with him on that fateful November 11th day almost 8 years ago. We know a little bit about Robert Baker, Rust, prior to the riots. He was born on January 24th, 1993, to academics that worked in university. What is also known, unfortunately, is the mysterious circumstances surrounding his parents' death. Circumstances that surround those deaths are going to kind of pop up regarding the riot later, so make sure you're paying attention. His parents were found dead in a murder-suicide initiated by the father, Theodore Baker. While this would have been typically written off as another tragedy, since Theodore and his wife Mary were verified by people that knew them to have had some sort of a rocky relationship. However, the reason why it wasn't deemed such is because autopsies showed extreme brain swelling and a hemorrhaging from Theodore's eyes. A lot of investigation was done to get to the bottom of the cause. While it was theorized that Robert caused the incident through an unfortunate activation of abilities, which is unfortunately common around that age that Robert was at 10 to 12 range, sometimes that activation of powers can cause tragedies such as that. However, anything that would indicate powers came out negative. There was no trace as to what could have caused such trauma. Usually, when we're talking about incidents such as this, or people that enact similar incidents, there's some kind of pheromone or some kind of secretion that would have made it apparent. Some examples could be a little bit obscure, but the 1970s reformed supercriminal from Norway, nicknamed Faye, with their hallucinogenic pheromones, or the much more recent Ribbit from Brazil with his poisonous secretions, which can cause intense hallucinations and then death. However, there were no indicators of such things. Afterwards, Robert was placed within the foster care system. He was described as observant and intelligent by his peers, but he coasted through school with average grades and was instead put on a track for a trade. He had started attending Chips and Beans roughly a year prior to his graduation, according to those that knew him personally. He quickly made a name for himself as a witty and observant conversationalist with those who interacted with him. He was also described as someone who had kind of a haunted perspective on things. He wasn't an outright cynic or anything, don't get me wrong, but he tended to have a critical gaze on various subjects. One thing he criticized the most was the British government. While the UK, like many Western nations, provides opportunities to those wishing to use their powers, it isn't absolute like the US specifically. While those with powers are allowed to come into positions of power in the US, the same couldn't really be said for those not within the US. As you all know, in the last 16 years, there has been an increased push for those within the UK to allow such a thing for people with powers to kind of gain more political power, to have kind of, Robert was one of the biggest voices for that, and he frequently would mention them in his slam poetry and on his Instagram in very heated captions. As I had mentioned, he would eventually get attention for his provocative writings online and then within the coffee shop, and he would grow a decent following composed of powered individuals and outspoken individuals that don't possess powers. He eventually became the face for the movement and started staging peaceful protests out in the streets with some of his followers. However, of course, these peaceful protests didn't last for long. On November 11th, 2017, a crowd of 300 individuals, mostly powered individuals, with some non-powered individuals amongst them, gathered for what started out as a normal protest they would have attended many times alongside Robert. However, it soon turned violent, with some of the attendees having reasonably dangerous powers, such as fire breathing and electricity projection. The Queen's Gambit superhero team quickly got involved when police were getting overwhelmed. Robert was found huddling nearby in an alley, and he was arrested. After the trial process, he was sent to prison for inciting a riot. Now, the reason why he was sent to the DC prison complex is because the prison also provides services towards those with burgeoning powers. Some can become more apparent later in life, kind of like late-term puberty or something. Or some of the more esoteric abilities that science can't really quantify. Autopsies revealed those involved in the riot were displaying similar symptoms to Robert's father when that unfortunate incident happened years ago. So, it being common practice to err on the side of caution when it comes to potential abilities, Robert was sent for his crimes and was also given the support he needed within the DC prison complex. Now, we don't really know how effective this was, and given the riots, some are hazarding the guess that it wasn't that effective. While no definitive information has came out yet confirming or denying that Rust, or Robert, was involved in the riots, there are some reputable sources that indicates there is a strong possibility of inmates displaying similar symptoms. However, I don't know. I'm leaning on the side that he is involved, but let me know what you think. Anyway, if you found that interesting, be sure to give a follow. If you're like me and like to follow everything powered related, well then, why in hell wouldn't you do that in the first place? Catch you down the road, pal fans.